For 72 hours, time stopped behaving normally aboard the Laffey. Minutes stretched until they felt endless. And hours collapsed into something indistinguishable from pain and exhaustion. The first impact shattered any illusion that this would be a short fight. Metal screamed. Fire bloomed where steel had been moments before. And the ship instantly transformed from a weapon into a burning, drifting test of human endurance. From that point on, survival wasn't about winning. It was about lasting. There was no real night anymore. Smoke blocked the sky, flames lit the decks, and the rhythm of sleep vanished completely. Men stayed awake not because they were alert, but because fear wouldn't let their bodies shut down. Every sound carried meaning. The whine of an incoming aircraft. The dull thud of explosions nearby. The creak of a wounded hull taking on stress it was never designed to bear. Even silence became terrifying, because it only meant something worse might be coming next. As fires spread and compartments flooded, the crew entered a cycle that never reset. Put out flames. Drag the wounded. Patch the hull. Reload weapons. Repeat. Hands blistered, lungs burned, and dehydration crept in unnoticed. The body's warning signals stopped working properly. Hunger didn't matter. Pain blurred into background noise. What mattered was staying upright long enough to respond when the next emergency hit. Because it always did. Psychologically, this was where the real battle took place. Every man aboard had been trained for combat. But almost no one is trained for sustained terror without rest. The mind began playing tricks. Some heard voices that weren't there. Others became strangely calm. Moving on instinct alone, as if emotion had been switched off to conserve energy. There was no room for panic. Yet panic hovered constantly, waiting for a single moment of weakness to break through. What made it worse was the uncertainty. No one knew how long this would last. There was no countdown, no reassurance, no guarantee of rescue. Each new hit felt like it might be the one that finally finished the ship. The one where the water wouldn't stop coming in. Where the fire couldn't be controlled, where the hull would simply give up. And yet, somehow, it didn't. The Laffey kept floating, forcing the men aboard to keep going with it. Decision-making under those conditions became almost impossible. Simple choices felt heavy, delayed by exhaustion and shock. Some men froze, not out of cowardice, but because their brains were overloaded. Others pushed themselves past safe limits, driven by a quiet, desperate logic. If I stop moving, I won't start again. Leadership mattered, but even orders had to fight their way through the fog of fatigue and trauma. By the second and third days, survival became less about skill and more about mental stubbornness. The body wanted to collapse. The mind wanted an ending. Any ending. Just to escape the strain. But those who stayed alive did so by clinging to small, immediate tasks. One hose. One wound. One step. Thinking any further ahead was unbearable. This is what 72 hours of constant threat does to people. It strips away ideas of glory and replaces them with raw human persistence. On the Laffey, survival wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, brutal, and repetitive. A war fought inside the mind as much as on the deck. Where staying alive meant refusing, again and again, to let exhaustion decide the outcome. When the ordeal finally ended, the number itself felt unreal. 3. Not 3 heroes standing tall at the end of a victorious battle. But 3 men still breathing after everything else had been taken. The scale of loss was so overwhelming that it forced a difficult question to the surface. Why them? What separated the living from the dead when everyone had endured the same fire? The same explosions, the same 72 hours of relentless pressure? The uncomfortable answer is that survival, in moments like this, isn't a clean story. It isn't awarded to the strongest, the bravest, or even the most experienced. On the Laffey, survival came down to timing, position, and decisions made in fractions of a second. Many of them unconscious. Being one step to the left instead of the right. Being assigned below deck instead of topside. Being knocked unconscious instead of instantly killed. These weren't choices. They were accidents of circumstance. Training mattered, but only up to a point. Drill and discipline can carry a person through chaos. But they can't stop shrapnel from finding its mark. Courage can push someone into danger to save others, but it doesn't grant immunity. In fact, some of the most courageous actions that took place during those 72 hours directly led to death. Men who ran toward fires. Who stayed at their stations longer than they should have. Who refused to abandon wounded shipmates. Many of them never made it out. Survival didn't reward virtue. It simply selected. The 3 who lived carried something heavier than victory. Memory. They remembered the sounds of the ship tearing itself apart. The weight of bodies they couldn't save. The faces of men who were alive one moment and gone the next. Survival meant living with the knowledge that a different step, a different task assignment, a different moment in time could have swapped their fate with anyone else's. That randomness doesn't fade easily. It lingers. Psychologically, this is where the story becomes even darker. Being alive after something like this doesn't feel like winning. It feels like unfinished business. Survivors often describe a strange guilt. Not because they did something wrong, but because they didn't do something that explains why they lived. There's no clear reason. No satisfying logic. Just the fact that the world kept going without the people who didn't make it. This is why the Laffey's story challenges the way we talk about heroism. We like clean narratives where bravery leads to survival and sacrifice leads to meaning. But reality is messier. The ship became a filter that stripped human life down to chance and endurance. The men who survived didn't outfight death. They outlasted it, minute by minute, without knowing they were doing anything special at all. It also exposes the limits of the human body and mind. No one is built for sustained terror. No one is meant to function for days without sleep while under constant threat. The fact that anyone survived at all is remarkable. But the fact that so few did is a reminder of how fragile humans are when pushed beyond design limits. We adapt, we endure, and then, eventually, something breaks. In the end, the three survivors didn't carry a story of triumph. They carried proof. Proof of how thin the line between living and dying really is. And how little control we have once that line is crossed. The Laffey didn't choose who lived. Fate did. Coldly, randomly, and without explanation. And that may be the hardest truth of all to sit with when the smoke finally clears.